Hey guys, what's going on? It's Gatsu. Today we're talking about Destruction Warlock. This is my basic Destruction Warlock rundown. This video has gotten delayed twice. Each time I basically ended up with something that went horribly wrong. So, sorry this is a little later than I wanted it to be. However, it did give me more time to play Destruction and get a bit more familiar with it. So let's hop in and take a look at the talents. So with talents for Destruction Warlock, there is a little bit of room. Typically for dungeons, you're not going to be running the same talents as you would in a raid for Destruction. For the most part, you're either going to be focusing on doing massive AoE damage or doing moderate AoE damage and just totally bananas insane single target during your Infernal window. It all comes down to what your group needs as to what you should probably be taking. So the talent build that I recommend, that I've had the most success with so far, is starting off in the first row here with Flashover. Conflag deals 25% additional damage and grants an additional charge of Backdraft. I found this to be far superior to Eradication for myself, simply because even with the level of haste that I have, like I'm actually pretty speedy cast-wise with procs and such, Flashover just seems to do more for me. Eradication, of course, will probably be better once my haste is more consistent. Soulfire, unfortunately, just isn't very strong right now. It is, cool to have an extra button, but for the most part, I haven't ever really wanted Soulfire or needed Soulfire. I hope there is a reason to run this in the future, because I really like Soulfire. The next row here, level 30, we have Reverse Entropy. Your spells have a chance to grant you 15% haste for 8 seconds. This spell is awesome. This passive is great. A 15% haste proc when your stats are very low is incredible. And because of the amount of spells that you are casting, you're going to see this buff up a ton. Super, super useful. Get used to running it. You're going to be running it for a while. Now, alternatively, you can run Internal Combustion. Chaos Bolt will then consume up to 5 seconds of immolates damage over time effect on your target, instantly dealing that much damage. This essentially speeds up our burst even further. Destruction has crazy burst anyway, so I don't really see the need for Internal Combustion. This is mostly a talent that I would use in Raid, and that I actually did use in Raid on stream this week. But for the most part, for dungeons, I'm just running Reverse Entropy because having more haste procs just seems to be more beneficial for me and my current playstyle. If you're comfortable with Internal Combustion, definitely run it. It's a good bit of damage. Shadowburn, of course, this is personal preference as well here. This gives you essentially a quick way to generate extra shards on trash if you're good at sniping some Shadowburns. For the most part, I haven't really wanted to run Shadowburn because, like I said, I like Reverse Entropy. However, in higher Mythic Pluses, when we're going to be doing a lot of kiting and that, and there's more movement, it's very possible I'll be running Shadowburn. Because why not? It's actually a very strong ability. Now, the level 45 row is literally personal preference. Demon's Skin or Dark Pact is the typical one you will take for Mythic Plus, just for survivability's sake. Our Destruction is nowhere near as tanky as the other Warlock specs, even though you get your, your Soul Shield up pretty quickly. Dark Pact just really helps you if there's a mechanic you need to soak, or if there's a particularly dangerous pool. Like, for instance, in a Tall Dazar on the steps heading up to the Priestess there with the Construct. Dark Pact can save your life there and make your healer, just give your healer a little bit more breathing room if that's what they need. Demon Skin is also completely passive, so if you're not in danger of, if you don't feel you need Dark Pact, Demon Skin's passive and will just give you more base absorb. And of course, if survivability is not going to be an issue, period, Burning Rush for extra movement speed, because who doesn't like to move fast? The level 60 row, right now we have one choice, that is Cataclysm. The other two talents are simply not worth it. Unless there's major changes to unless they either severely nerf Cataclysm, which, please Blizzard, don't do that. We don't need a nerf on Cataclysm. If anything, we just need to buff the other two up to be, at the very least, semi-competitive with Cataclysm. Cataclysm is good for both single target and AoE, because it does a ton of damage. You'll see 91, 61 Shadow Flame damage. For reference, your baseline Chaos Bolt, rather, for me at least, is 12 to 16 and costs Soul Shards. Cataclysm doesn't, and this is AoE. So Cataclysm's insane. Totally good. Fire and Brimstone, just it cuts it down to 40% damage cleave, unless you've got, I think it's like 10 plus mobs. This just isn't good, and in that case, they're most likely not elite, so Cataclysm will beat them. And Inferno, of course, buffs Rain of Fire, which Rain of Fire is unfortunately one of those AoEs that takes a little too long to do its damage in most situations, so again, Cataclysm is just better. The 75 row here, we have your choice of either Dark Fury, Mortal Coil, or Demonic Circle. I know most people will take Demonic Circle. I'm honestly not too dependent on Demonic Circle. I'm very good at planning my movement in that, so I typically don't take Demonic Circle. There will definitely be cases where I do, because I will want that extra movement. But for the most part, I either take Dark Fury for the reduced Shadow Fury CD, or if I don't expect to need to use Shadow Fury on cooldown for the most part, I'll take Mortal Coil just for that extra healing. The level 90 row, there is a choice between Roaring Blaze, which is gives Conflag a damage over time element, or Grimoire of Supremacy. Now, the difference between these two comes down to what your role is. Roaring Blaze, I have found, is typically just a little bit better whenever you're basically the AoE person, because you're going to be cleaving as much as possible. Roaring Blaze is, just it's a little bit of extra damage. It does stack up quite quickly because you are conflagging pretty much on cooldown for the most part, so it will do a ton of damage. Grimoire of Supremacy gives you a massive focus amount of damage, and with certain Azerite traits and other talents like Dark Soul Instability in the final row, Grimoire of Supremacy can take your damage to some pretty insane levels, single target. It is incredible for boss damage, so get used to using Supremacy. Currently, at the time of recording here, Grimoire of Sacrifice is basically useless. It just does not do enough damage to compete with the other two in the row, like nowhere close. So it's either Supremacy or Roaring Blaze, whichever one you're more comfortable with. Now in the final row, it's basically a choice between Channel Demon Fire, which is an AoE cooldown, it does a bunch of damage, generates a bunch of soul shards. Super awesome ability in general. I love Channel Demon Fire. If you want the extra AoE, it's great. Dark Soul Instability will give you 30% increased crit chance for 20 seconds. This, of course, will buff the damage from our Chaos Bolt and cause us to do more single target. And who doesn't love more single target burst and more damage on our Chaos Bolt? I mean, that just seems really good, So, yeah, there is definitely that. So, moving on to how to actually, get the most damage out of Destruction when you're running in a dungeon. So keep in mind that, whenever you're fighting a boss, typically it's going to be single target. There's a couple of fights with adds, but for the most part as a Warlock, your general role is going to be that tank, not tank, your boss damage. You're not too worried about AoE. So what you'll end up doing is you will pop your potion, and then you'll pop an Incinerate with about 2 to 3 seconds left on the timer, depending on your haste. So you'll go ahead and lead off with an Incinerate. From there, you will pop Cataclysm to make sure you apply your dot. At this point, you would then cast your Summon Infernal, both of your cooldowns, trinkets, etc., and then immediately Conflag, Chaos Bolt, Incinerate, Conflag, and at this point you would Chaos Bolt, and you just continue your general rotation. Now, of course, you want to make sure that you are maintaining Immolate the whole time, because that is super, super important. Always make sure you're only Chaos Bolting whenever you're at 4 or higher Soul Shards, because you want to make sure you don't end up capping. If you do end up capping, it is okay. You just want to make sure you have a Chaos Bolt off as soon as possible. Anytime you get the opportunity, you want to make sure you're using Cataclysm to replace or refresh your Immolate. Super important that you do that. Will always help you out there. One of the little things I can say is that, for the most part, you're going to want to make sure that whenever you're using your backdraft charges, that you are using them primarily for Chaos Bolt, because Chaos Bolt has a fairly long cast time. It's 2.1 seconds. If you use it on an Immolate, it's just going to waste it, because Immolate is a 1.2, 1 point something-ish cast, depending on haste. It's fairly short. Obviously, Incinerate is a little less than Chaos Bolt and does substantially less damage than Chaos Bolt. So you're going to want to make sure that whenever you pop your Conflag and you have that backdraft stack, immediately following that Conflag, you want to be able to Chaos Bolt. If not, you may want to wait to Conflag and use another Incinerate. For the most part, what ends up happening with your rotation is you're just going to go ahead and you're going to do your your Incinerates to generate shards. Again, when you hit above 4 shards, make sure you Chaos Bolt. If you cap during your Chaos Bolt cast, remember that amount that you were at and try to do it slightly earlier. Most of the time, whenever I'm in Raid and I'm not trying to explain how to do things, well, Raid or Mythic Plus, I will Chaos Bolt whenever I hit 4 shards, and then I'll typically be just a little bit over 4 whenever the cast actually goes off. Again, just trying to make sure that you do not overcap on shards, because you will essentially lose out on that potential damage. If you want to get super technical and min-maxy about it. Now, whenever it comes to like AoE, AoE is basically dependent on what your group is doing. If you have a ton of targets, like over here we've got these 3 target dummies, obviously you want to make sure that you're hitting Cataclysm on them. If you're talented in the channel Demon Fire, you want to use that as often as possible. And if the mobs are going to be stationary or, will not be moving too quickly, a Rain of Fire is completely worth casting. It is definitely decent damage. It's just that if the mobs are going to move, you would be much better suited, most likely, to popping a Havoc and then hitting an Immolate Conflag and then a Chaos Bolt right after. Most likely. If that's not the case, that's not the case. But if you can get away with using Rain of Fire, you definitely should. It's not that the spell itself doesn't do any damage. It does do damage when it gets to go through its full duration. But the problem with Rain of Fire that most theory crafters and high-level players like to express is that it's decent damage, but it either takes too long or the radius of the effect itself is just not big enough. So, keep that in mind when you're using Rain of Fire, that you are spending 3 soul shards. That is a ton of resources. And if you're not going to get all of the damage out of it, you're probably better off just casting a Chaos Bolt with Havoc, or even just throwing a Chaos Bolt at whatever your priority kill target is instead. So I really hope that this guide, this quick primer here, did help you guys out. And, oh, you know what? I need to talk about Azerite traits. So, of course, I'm running my goggles here. I'm running Azerite power weights as well, which I need to swap this here. There we go. So, in general, with Azerite traits for Destruction, the primary thing you're going to be looking for as far as a Tier 2 trait is Overwhelming Power. Overwhelming Power gives you 25 applications of a 20 haste buff. For those of you that are quick in math, 20 times 25. It's a lot of haste. I believe it's about 500. It's a lot of haste. And haste is Destro Warlock's best friend. The more casts you can get off, the more damage you can do. The quicker your spells tick, i.e. the quicker that your Immolate ticks because of haste, whenever you hit those haste breakpoints, which don't worry about hitting any haste breakpoints, just saying haste in general is very good. The more ticks you get, the more soul shards you're going to get, the more Chaos Bolts you can do. And really the whole spec's built around getting as many Chaos Bolts off as possible. So, again, just in general, if you have access to the Azerite goggles here, before you get into Raid, they are super strong. Synaptic Spark Capacitor is awesome. Overwhelming Power is what you're going to want to look for as your Tier 2 trait. And of course, the Tier 3 traits don't matter at all. They're typically not damage. Whenever you're talking about what you're looking for in a standard Azerite piece, for single target, you want Crashing Chaos. This makes, whenever you summon your Infernal, the damage of your next 8 Chaos Bolts is increased. With this gear level, it is at 2218 per Chaos Bolt. That stacks up, of course, with those additional 8% per Soul Shard spent from Grimoire of Supremacy, so it makes your Chaos Bolts hit like a freight train. Guaranteed crits on a big spell that's going to hit even harder. Yeah, that's really good. Motherload is where you get this particular chest piece. As far as I know, this is, I believe, the best chest piece you can get from standard Mythics. So Petticoat of the self-stylized Azerite Baron. There's a couple of shoulder options that you do have. There's Pauldrons of Vile Corruption that have this from, I believe it is Underrot. There's the Squall Shaper Mantle that has Crashing Chaos and Overwhelming Power as well. There's a whole bunch that have them. So, you know, it's not too difficult to get a hold of a chest piece that has Crashing Chaos. Ideally, of course, you do want Overwhelming Power as well. If you have the option to pick them up, Grasping Crown of the Deep, which I believe is from the Siege of Borealis dungeon. This is, I believe, the top simming piece for Destruction, but you actually take Dagger in the Back. Thing to keep in mind with Dagger in the Back is that Dagger in the Back also, you know, assumes that you are behind the target, which means you will be getting additional stacks of the damage. So, you know, do keep that in mind. This is not always the best trade. If you're always going to be in front of the target, Dagger in the Back actually loses a lot of value. So do keep that in mind. If you do not have if you don't have access to Crashing Chaos Azerite traits, there is also, let me find it here, there is also Chaotic Inferno, which does increase the base damage of your Chaos Bolt. Then it gives your Chaos Bolt a 25% chance to make your next Incinerate cast instant. This is still perfectly fine. However, most of the pieces that Chaotic Inferno is on also have something else in the row, like in this case, Blightborn Infusion, which will actually probably be more damage when everything is all said and done. So it's not that this trait is necessarily bad, because it's not. It's just that keep an eye on the you know, the zone-specific Azerite traits as well, as they are super, super useful. Now, as far as trinkets and gearing besides Azerite gear goes, you are looking primarily for crit and haste gear. Versatility is not bad for you, it's just boring. And then Mastery actually sits fairly low on the totem pole. There's a couple of very high parses on Warcraft logs that are super heavy Mastery. And when you look at those, keep in mind that those are players that have an absurd level of Mastery. The one guy has like 1600 Mastery, I think, on a couple of the logs in Uldir. That's a silly, silly number. When you stack anything to that degree, you know, you should get good value out of it. But because our Mastery as Destruction is somewhat random, it is not consistent, so it's probably not the best stat to stack. Crit and haste, of course, will always be your strongest for Destruction unless they buff Mastery. Now, looking at trinkets, any trinkets that give you haste, the Ignition Mage's Fuse, is a very strong haste buff. This basically gives you a heroism. This is an insane trinket. Get one. There's been world quests for it a couple of times. Definitely look for this. Try to get it. Run your Toll to Gore every week, Mythic. You know, try to farm it Mythic Plus. Really, really good trinket. It's actually the top simming trinket for Destruction right now. It's very high up there for the other specs as well, just because of the overall haste you're getting. If you have access to the world boss, which, you know, Alliance did for several days, and you're insanely lucky like I am, you can end up with Lion's Grace. I'm wearing this purely because of item level. If I had pretty much any other trinket at, you know, 355 that was, you know, a pretty decent proc, I would probably take off Lion's Grace, but it's huge damage. And of course, versatility isn't bad, it's just kind of boring. Now, for enchants, you do want to make sure you're wearing haste. I was running his Affliction last night in Raid, so this still has a Mastery enchant on it. This should be haste. But you want haste everywhere that you can get it, even if it's not, mostly haste. You want haste and crit, haste and crit. Everywhere you can find crit and haste, you want to have crit and haste. If you're like me and you're getting a ton of mastery gear, consider playing Affliction. However, Destruction is still fine even with a bunch of mastery. Like, I've got 698 mastery right now, but of course I'm sitting with haste up there, and with, a little bit of crit. I need more crit. I know. You can tell me that in the comments, I'm sure. As far as weapon enchant goes, quick navigation is your choice. That is the only one you want, and that's probably the way it's going to stay. I ran Destruction quite a bit in Mythic Plus this week. It was a blast. I should have a video or two up in the next couple of days showing off a little bit of Destruction. It was fun. I enjoyed it. And I hope to run some more this week now that they're giving us a 5% damage increase. That is huge. Hopefully it actually helps the state of Warlock and Raid as well, because Demo and Destro were pretty far behind in general, just because of where they're sitting on the totem pole. No king rules forever, but, it'd be really nice if the other two specs had a shot at it. So, anyway, guys, thank you for checking in today. If you liked the video, be sure you liked it. If you didn't dislike it, leave me a comment. I'll be sure to respond to any questions I can to help you figure out Destro. If you need a hand with that. There's a demo video up as well. The Affliction Lock video is actually over 10,000 views at this point, which blew my mind. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you want to support the channel, check out our Patreon link. It's down there in the description. We're going to have a lot of stuff coming here in the next couple of days. We're actually going to be recording a podcast here in the next day or two, talking about our first week in Mythic Plus, and as well as in the raid for the first week. So, should be a blast. Thanks again for checking in, guys, and I'll see you next time.